Sarah Murray's senior speech. We'd like to give a warm welcome to her family, her mom and dad, Carrie and Jefferson Murray, her sister, 11th grader Mary Hunt, her brother, 7th grader Jefferson, and her grandparents, Mary Hunt and Larry Murray. Welcome. Sarah came to prep in the 6th grade. She's been a member of the volleyball, basketball, track and field, and cross-country teams during her time in the upper school. Outside of school, she's making a name for herself as a self-employed artist with several commissions under her belt. Speaking of art, Sarah's a student I will always remember. We struggled to find common ground in Intro to Art her 9th grade year. Well, it must not have been too bad, because Sarah has stayed with me in art for all of her 4 years here. Sarah has a love of art that runs deep. She is a skilled draftsman, and her work is beautiful. She has other interests as well, including a love of animals, especially dogs. She also loves chocolate and bubblegum flavored lollipops. Every time I buy a bag of Dum-Dums for my students, you guys know I do that, I go through the bag first to pull out all of the bubblegum ones just for Sarah. Sarah, these are for you after your speech. Welcome Sarah to the podium.
It was around 15 years ago. I woke up one morning to see my parents very excited about something. Around that afternoon, they led me outside when I saw a big, bright, colorful structure in the backyard. Still oblivious to what was going on, I walked up to the strange object. The first thing that hit me was the sound. A deafening roar coming from the side of the entrance. On the inside of the monster, strange figures making even more strange sounds. Overwhelmed by the shock, I ran back inside, back into my room, hid under the covers of my bed, and stayed there for the entire day, not daring to come back out. Years later, with recollection from my parents, I figured out what was really going on that day. The loud, terrifying thing was a bounce house, and those figures inside were the neighborhood kids. It was my birthday. My mother started to notice that something was off when I was 2 years old. I didn't like to go to public places, especially ones with loud noises. I wanted to wear the exact same clothes every day. And let's just say I was obsessed with Buzz Lightyear and Thomas the Train, especially Thomas the Train. She took me to a lady who specialized in testing for autism. When she was finished, she confirmed that I had autism, but we weren't aware of the severity yet. For 3 days a week, I went to occupational therapy and speech therapy. She worked with me with different games and puzzles to help me with my speech and fine motor skills. In occupational therapy, I was taught how to perform different tasks and was helped with some of my sensory issues, for example, playing in a giant pit of plastic balls. If we ever going to do something different that day, I would need to be prepped that morning so I knew what would be coming next. So what exactly is autism? Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, is a developmental disorder that affects communication and behavior. The term came from Swiss psychiatrist Eugen Bleuler, who started using the term to refer to a group of symptoms related to schizophrenia. It comes from the Greek word autos, which means self. It describes someone who has become an isolated self. It can be diagnosed at any age, but is said to be a developmental disorder because symptoms generally appear in the first 2 years of life. It's a spectrum disorder because there's a wide variation in the type and severity of symptoms. ASD is a lifelong disorder, but treatments and services can improve a person's symptoms and ability to function. To provide some differentiation in diagnosis, the DSM-5, the newest diagnostic manual, includes 3 levels of autism based on necessary levels of support. People with level 1 autism need the least support, while those with level 3 need the most. Despite this, most people use the terms high and low functioning as they're less clinical. It's kind of like how most people call more developed countries and lesser developed countries first and third world countries. Although the terms are usually biased perspectives of the parent and the practitioner, high functioning usually just means that the subject can hold a conversation. There are certain interactive behaviors that are often seen from people with ASD. These can include making little or no eye contact, being slow to someone calling their name, having trouble with back and forth conversation, or having facial expressions, movements, and gestures that do not match with what's being said. It's also common for them to have an unusual tone of voice that may sound flat and robot-like. There are also restrictive or repetitive behaviors that can go along with this. These include things like repetition of certain words or phrases, a behavior called echolalia, having lasting intense interest in certain topics, such as numbers, details, or facts, getting upset by slight changes in routine, I remember that part, being more or less sensitive than others to sensory input, such as light, noises, clothes, or temperature. I can relate to that. I still hate loud noises. The exact causes of ASD are still unknown, but researchers suggest that genes can act together with the environment to affect development in ways that lead to ASD. There are some risk factors that lead to increased chance of having autism. Having a sibling with ASD or having older parents. People with conditions such as Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, and Rett syndrome are more likely to have ASD. There are some strengths that can come along with having autism though. Being able to learn things in detail and remember information for long periods of time, being strong visual and auditory learners, and often excelling at subjects like math, science, music, and art. While I'm in the middle of the topic, I might as well do some myth busting. Most of you have probably heard the belief that vaccines cause autism. So who came up with that? Does the information hold credibility? It originated in the 1997 study published by Andrew Wakefield, a British surgeon. The article was published in The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal, suggesting that the measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine caused an increased rate of autism in British children. The paper has since been discredited due to severe procedural errors, undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, and ethical violations. Several other major studies have been conducted, but none of them have found a link between any vaccine and the likelihood of developing autism. Several studies have now identified symptoms in children well before they even receive the MMR vaccine. Even more recent research provides evidence that autism develops in the utero, well before a baby is born or receives vaccinations. Moving on from the controversy, there are many different types of autism. The kind I've had is called Asperger's syndrome. It's a previously used diagnosis on the autistic spectrum, but in 2013, it became part of the one umbrella diagnosis of ASD. It's different from classic autism in that it has less severe symptoms and is absent of language delays. There's no significant cognitive delay, and most people with it possess average to above average intelligence. It's even speculated that certain scientists like Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton have Asperger's. Diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome has increased in recent years, but it's unclear whether it is more prevalent or if more professionals are detecting it. The first step to diagnosis is assessment, including the developmental history and observation. It's important to treat early in life for increased chance of being successful in school and eventually living independently. Asperger's generally involves difficulty with social interactions, restricted interests, and desire for sameness. Asperger's has some strengths that come along with it, such as great focus and persistence, an aptitude for recognizing patterns, and attention to detail. I guess that explains this. But Asperger's also has many of the same challenges as typical autism, such as hypersensitivities to things like light, sound, and tastes, difficulty with give and take conversations, difficulty with nonverbal communication skills, such as distance, loudness, and tone, uncoordinated movements, clumsiness, anxiety, and depression. There are multiple therapies and services that can improve the symptoms listed. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help address anxiety. Social skills training classes help with conversational skills and understanding social cues. Speech therapy can help with voice control. Physical and occupational therapy can improve coordination. There are also psychoactive medicines that can help manage associated anxiety, depression, and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. I was put on Wellbutrin to help with my anxiety without any real side effects. One time in pre-K, I was taken off of it, and later that day, I apparently hit one of the teachers. So I was put back on it. I finally stopped taking it around middle school. In conclusion, doing this presentation has taught me not only a lot about autism, but also a lot about myself. Despite all the things listed, I never really felt like I was different. I never felt like my condition defined me, mostly because I didn't know what it was. Before I started my research, I thought that all of this was in the past, that I simply grew out of it. But now I see it a little differently. I grew into it. I mean, it makes sense. Autism never truly goes away. But with the help of my parents and the dedication of the doctors and the therapists, they taught me how to control myself and be able to cope with the ever-changing world around me. And with the help of those close to me, learn how to fit in. I guess if there's anything to take from this, don't judge a person, thing, or situation by its first impression. Delve more into the topic if you can, to gain a better understanding of the subject at hand. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be glad you did. Thank you.